Hello and happy Friday, and thanks for tuning in to radiofreerhinecliff.org. And this show in particular, correct me if I'm Norm, I'm your host, Norm, and I'm thrilled to be here tonight with Susan Mitchell. Susan Mitchell, thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having me. This is pretty exciting for me.
Is it? I can't even imagine, because you've had an exciting life. You've done all kinds of amazing things. You've lived all over the place, traveled even more places, and now you have a film company.
It's been exciting.
Yeah.
I have lived in a number of places. I don't even know where to start.
Yeah.
I think all of that has influenced who I have become. I was always a sort of strong math kind of loner kind of person.
Uh-huh.
And then I went to a New York school that expanded me. My best friend was Sigourney Weaver, who I've tried to emulate ever since. But I went into banking, and, that was kind of the quiet little person I was supposed to be.
Right.
And covering many years all in a very short period of time. But after 20 years in banking, I went, there's more to life. Like, a good friend of mine was a movie star. My father always said I'd be a good actress. So I started thinking about that, and now I have both a financial advisory business globally, and I'm producing my own screenplay.
I love that. So this is a relatively new thing for you to be involved in the arts.
Well, not so new. I mean, in fact, in 2000, I lost my apartment in Ground Zero in 2001, right?
Oh, no.
And walking around in the dark, in the mud, trying to get to my place to get my passport, I went, I've got to do what I'm passionate about in life. So I did a little study for 6 months or so, Julia Cameron's The Artist's Way, and found that what I was really passionate about is film. And it's the combination of the financial structuring with which I'm familiar and adding the creative elements. I was always good at English too, so I just started studying. I mean, even 20 years ago, I was doing courses at NYU and studying screenplay writing in my spare time.
Right. Amazing. Let me back up to the apartment. So you lived in Lower Manhattan. On September 11th, 2001, you lost your apartment?
Well, the building was evacuated.
Right.
So, yes, I consider I lost it. Fortunately, it was a rental, so I could get out of a lease. It did reopen 6 months later, but I was long gone.
And were you able to get back in there on September 12th or 13th? Or?
Yeah, I mean, that was about it, 13th or 14th.
Uh-huh.
You really want to know? So I ended up staying in Chelsea with about 10 other evacuees at a mutual friend. I had nothing. I left with my dog in a hurry on 9/11, so I took a very dark-haired girl's ID, and in the dark, they didn't notice it wasn't my ID, and I got back to my apartment that way.
Wait, you borrowed somebody's ID and sort of passed it off as your own?
Yes, but I mean,
to get access because
yes,
it was cordoned off.
It was cordoned off, and you had to prove that you actually lived there to get in.
I mean, you didn't have any of your own ID. It was all back in the apartment.
Correct, yeah.
And so you say in the dark, this is nighttime that you're...
Well, it was nighttime. I think they opened it up like the evening of the 12th or 13th. The first time people could get back.
Right.
And it had to be dark because otherwise I didn't look the slightest bit like the person in the ID.
And was it dark in your apartment? Was there electricity?
Oh, no electricity.
Did you have a flashlight?
And the scary thing was there were still people in there living in the dark.
Right.
No, what happened is no electricity and no plumbing. And the debris from the collapse of the towers had infiltrated the ventilation system.
Oh.
So that's what makes an evacuation.
Sounds terrible. So you went to your apartment and you could only grab stuff you could carry in your arms and fit in your pockets. What were the things that you thought, I really need these things?
Well, obviously paperwork, passport and bank accounts and all that.
Uh-huh.
And then I was just told that I should plan to be comfortable. So it was like jeans and T-shirts and sweatshirts and those kind of things.
Right. And then you grabbed the stuff and you went up to this friend's house in Chelsea where there were another, 8 or 10 evacuees. And what were were you able to get back to your apartment again?
Yes. I mean, when and if I wanted to.
Okay.
The real question was, where am I going from here?
Right.
Talking about here.
And how did you figure that out?
Well, after about 3 days and 12 people in a 2-bedroom apartment, it was clear that some of us would have to move on.
Right.
And fortunately, I had a couple of friends who'd figured out how to reach me. The cell phones existed, but they were disconnected during the 9/11 event. And one had said, come to New Jersey, we'll look after you. And I went, no thanks, initially.
Right.
And then I went, day later, who was that who called me? So I started my week here and week there for a month or 6 weeks.
Right.
Until my then boyfriend said, look, either you find a new place to settle or you leave New York. So I went out, didn't mean to talk about this, but I went out on a Sunday afternoon in those days with the New York Times open houses.
Right.
In a special, neighborhood. In fact, a few of us were crossing paths and said, well, we might go to the West Village. We can sort of handle that. So I went out one Sunday afternoon with my 5 choices, right price range, right size, right location, and bought an apartment.
Wow. And where was that?
Well, I mean, it's a little longer story. I chose one that was bigger square footage for the same price. And my lawyer phoned me 2 weeks later and said, I don't think they're serious about selling. So I said to myself, okay. He said, number 2 on your list. So I went to number 2 on my list. They dropped the price $100,000, and I said, okay, this'll do. And it's 2 Horatio Street, very well-known entertainment building in the village. And so I've had a very good 20 years with fascinating neighbors.
Right. I love that. And why was it well known as an entertainment building?
It just has been for years and years and years. It's a Bing and Bing pre-war, well-managed, architecturally interesting buildings. And for me, whose real life is sort of more uptown, close to 5 subway stop lines.
Right.
So, but you can imagine in the state of trauma I was in, I wasn't thinking that clearly. Fortunately, my lawyer said, I'll do it all. And he called me in January and said, you can close tomorrow. I said, oh, good.
Well, that's pretty fast. And that's nice. Do you still have a place there?
That's where I live in the city, yeah.
Okay. That's nice. So it's been 20-some years.
23
years. And let me take you back to the morning of 9/11, which is fascinating. When that happened, you were there at your place in Tribeca. What did you think had happened? And who did you think, if anybody, was behind it?
Well, good question. Strangely, I worked on Wall Street in those days, and I always left my apartment at 8:30, 8:45 under Tower A, 9 o'clock at the office. That day, I stopped and talked to some people. Beautiful day, just chatted a bit. So at 8:45, I was still at my apartment. And clunk, thud, I call it. I thought that was a big armoire that fell down upstairs.
Right.
Better get to work. And got down to the lobby and I went, no armoire would make that amount of noise. And then the chaos. Went out, walked under Tower A, saw the hole in the building.
Egads. And so you see this, and what did you think had happened at that point? What were you hearing?
Oh, well, actually, just what everyone was saying was it was a commercial plane that was a little low.
Right.
And then I looked up, and the wingspan, it was still like the outline of a plane.
Right.
Was wall to wall in the building. And
right.
I said, that's bigger than a commercial plane. At which point the second plane came whizzing almost past our ears, and I went, oh my God, this is an attack. Ran home, got my dog. And actually, sort of, my parents' experience in London informed that quick decision. I just went, oh, this must be what it was like in London during World War II.
Right.
And
so your folks lived in London during World War II when bombings and air raids were
my mother,
norm.
as an American, was working at the U.S. Embassy.
Okay.
And my father was in the Navy, coming home to London. But my mother really was dodging the Blitz and the air raid.
Right. And your dad was English?
He was English, yes.
Okay. And your mom was American and German and American and German.
American-born, German-Danish
Right.
heritage.
Right. And this leads right into your screenplay, right? Which I read, and it's a really wonderful story, nicely told. And somebody said at one point, it might have been you, that it's almost like the sequel to Casablanca, which is a lovely description of it.
Well, thank you.
Can you describe the screenplay for people?
Well, it is based in Lisbon in World War II, which in fact was where Casablanca's story happened, even though they called it Casablanca. And people have called it Casablanca too, which is very flattering. In fact, I think you did too, Norm.
Maybe.
It's a story of my mother in New York, of German-Danish parents, furious that the U.S. was not entering into World War II against the Germans, who had given her parents a very bad time at the beginning of World War I. So they had fled to the U.S. And so she took it upon herself to get herself to where she saw the center of the action, which was Europe for the Allies. So with a little dramatization of the facts, true facts, the screenplay has her taking an exam for the U.S. Embassy in London, opening up as she marries a British naval officer, which was a legitimate situation. And she was planning to go to London to set up home for him and take on the Germans at the U.S. Embassy. However, in her travels to London by boat to Lisbon, the flights to London had been interrupted because Leslie Howard's plane had been shot down by the Germans, and there she was stuck in Lisbon. The U.S. consul there was very happy to have her help process German refugee visas, which was a little below her pay grade, but she had no choice. The consul wouldn't give her a boat or any other way of getting to London. He then enjoyed having her work for him. Well, of course, Lisbon and Portugal were neutral territory in World War II, which meant that any country you can imagine had a representative there trying to get information from the other country representatives. And Gertrude, the protagonist, was in the difficult situation of being a German heritage working for the U.S., and lo and behold, the Gestapo figured out just from her responses to conversation that she actually understood German, which now threatened her position with the Americans. So she got into tussle with the Gestapo threatening her trying to help the refugees, which didn't really appeal to her until a young refugee came along who had lost mother, father, and track of her brother. So Gertrude takes upon herself to track down the brother, at which point a British naval officer, not her husband, arrives to announce that her husband has been killed at sea. So now Gertrude is in Lisbon without a husband, without a home in London, and trying to make her way. So and the Portuguese police are very suspicious of this highly educated American working at the U.S. consulate as well. So we have a wonderful series of events with the Germans giving her false information about this young refugee, her giving the Germans false information about having processed their friends' visas. Derek, who's the British sailor who arrived, joins the intelligence because the accident at sea was very traumatic. So he's quietly trying to help Gertrude. And in the end, I really don't want to give it away, but in the end, Derek delivers the refugees material so she can get on her trip to New York, where she's found that her brother is gone. And Gertrude has to get out of Lisbon in a hurry before she's arrested, which the consul enables her to go to London. So, and then the British intelligence officer introduces Gertrude to his sister in London, and they live happily ever after. And Gertrude and Derek are my parents.
Amazing. So it's a historical fiction. You know, it's based in actual facts, and the connective tissue you made up. Did your folks talk about this stuff when you were younger? Was this part of the family lore?
Well, yeah, in the sense that my uncles and my father were all in the war.
Right.
And so they would talk about it sometimes on Sunday afternoon after lunch. My uncle by marriage was actually shot down over France at some point. Now I appreciate the horror of it all.
Right.
Gertrude, in real fact, was in London at the U.S. Embassy. That's the truth. So she lived through the Blitz and all that. So there are many stories to do with that. And Aunt Brenda, who was Derek's sister in London, who Gertrude befriended and lived with, is 98 years old today.
Oh, wow.
I visited her last week in London.
Oh, what a treat.
Oh, my God. I wish this was on TV so you could see the picture of her and me.
Oh, yeah, that'd be great. So when you were a kid and your dad and uncles were talking about all of this, because they all served, did they mind you sitting and listening? And were you interested when you were listening, or was it just the old people talking about crap?
Oh, the old people are just talking about it, yeah.
Yeah.
It was like, well, can we go out and play?
Right. Uh-huh.
I realize now what respect those three particular men had for each other and the work they'd done during the war, and how dangerous it was and how horrible it was in many ways. Because what had happened when Gertrude's husband was killed on the ship, Derek was the second in command. And what had happened was a wave had smashed the steering place. What do you call that?
Okay. I'm not sure, the cockpit or the...
Yeah, the sort of cockpit of a ship on the top,
right?
Yeah,
the bridge.
Bridge, thank you.
Yeah.
And Derek was left with a derelict ship with no rudder and a dead captain and 6 very badly injured seamen, I guess they're called.
Uh-huh.
So he actually, in real life, saved the ship mid-Atlantic. This happened off Greenland. It's a well-known storm, actually. So he took the ship, jerry-rigged a rudder on a destroyer, and apparently it was a 4-funnel destroyer, which is a significantly large destroyer. He somehow got it back to Halifax.
Wow.
So he was kind of a hero in many ways, too.
And Derek is your dad's name or your uncle's?
That's my dad's name, yeah.
And is your mom's name Gertrude?
Yes.
Oh.
You hadn't realized that.
I didn't realize that the characters in the screenplay had the same names. And they're past now, I'm guessing.
Yes.
How do you think they would like this screenplay of yours?
Yeah, good question. I actually, when I declared myself finished with the screenplay 2 years ago, I took it to Aunt Brenda.
Okay.
And I gave it to her, and she goes, "Oh, what's this?" So the only conversations that's pursued is what actress is going to play Brenda, because she does feature in the screenplay.
Oh, that's great. And Brenda, this is the 98-year-old?
Yep.
Okay.
She was 96 2 years ago.
And who did she think should play her?
They all think it should be Jessie Buckley. Jessica Buckley,
Uh-huh.
a British actress.
Who speaks German?
No.
Oh,
No, but Brenda wasn't German. Gertrude was German.
okay.
It's actually, I'm still struggling for the Gertrude character. I get a lot of good suggestions, but
And when you were writing this, lots of people write, they imagine the character, or they imagine an actor they want to play the character. Were you imagining your mom?
well, I did have her as, do you want to know the name? Alicia Vikander. And I saw Derek as Eddie Redmayne, and the Gestapo as Jeremy Irons as a starting point. But you have to understand, one starts writing these screenplays a good 8 years before they actually are published. And so since then, I have co-producers in Portugal who are a wonderful team. And they keep me straight and narrow, and they say, it's been 8 years. So Jeremy is now 79 years old.
Right.
So I'm having to sort of refresh my list.
So when did you first decide you wanted to write this story?
Really, whenever, I met new people or whatever, we were just chatting, and they would say, how did your parents meet? Because,
Right.
as you know, I've lived in 3 countries and, kind of more than that, actually. So, this is very international. So when I would tell the true story of how they met, they would go, so many people went, that's a movie.
Right.
So when you combine that with the fact that I found that I was really passionate about making film,
Right.
it all sort of came together. And then, as you know, you have to define the characters. You don't just, it's not real life, and, this is not a documentary, this is a drama. So it takes a number of years to define, and I found people like Tom Sawyer, the really good writers, actually start with who the characters are, fully define the characters and what they're doing and all that. And the screenplay almost falls out of that.
Uh-huh.
So it took me a while to learn all that.
And so some of the characters obviously were easier to define because they were sort of based on people you knew. Which of the characters in this were really difficult to flesh out?
Well, I actually narrowed it down to about 6, each of whom is pretty well defined. Gestapo's pretty well defined. Gertrude and Derek, the consul, the young refugee. Now that was an additional, dramatization. But once we defined that she was a young girl without any family, it was pretty clear what her story would be.
Uh-huh.
And really the most difficult one is the secret police, who we have as a double agent who was a messenger at the U.S. consul as well as secret police.
Right.
And I kept wanting him to overhear conversations at the cafes, because all the refugees and foreigners hung out in the Rossio in Lisbon. A fabulous book that describes all that. And I kept wanting the secret police just to be overhearing conversations. Well, no, I was told dramatically that that was boring, so I had to figure out how he actually, interacted with them.
Right. So who told you that's boring?
Well, Tom Sawyer was one of them.
Uh-huh.
But other people, I was continuously studying and listening to people. And
So how long ago do you think you first had the spark? Like, all right, fine. Everybody tells me it's like a movie. I'm going to sit down and write this.
Well, I knew nothing about screenwriting, so I did take courses for, a period of years.
Where'd you take those courses?
Mostly online.
Nice.
Well, I also was taking classes at NYU
Okay.
on other aspects of it, cinematography and directing. And
Oh, fun.
Well, yeah, because I was teaching at NYU in economics at the time, and every class I taught, I was allowed to take one free class.
Oh, I like that deal.
And so, yeah, this was a great deal for
And
3 years.
what were the courses you taught in economics?
Well, it was actually something called enterprise risk management,
Uh-huh.
which, so a new field called risk management sort of developed in the last 20 years.
Okay.
And which were, algorithms to measure the exposure to financial risk, and usually in three areas: financial, market, and operating. And so the banks took this on, right? But my argument was these jobs were so esoteric and so unique to whatever they were measuring that across the organization, they didn't understand the total risk exposure. And so I took this to NYU, and they thought it was pretty interesting. And in continuing education. And my first class was like mid-career people from Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, Drexel Burnham, Chase. I'm going, holy shit, these people know what they're doing. Anyhow, I explained to them this, silo structure really didn't work for the organization to know the total structure. And these kids would come back to me after the second and third class and go, this is fascinating. We thought we'd just learn another mathematical technique. And instead we're learning, how the whole organization should function.
Right.
So I did that actually up until 2008, when there was a financial crisis, due very much to the fact that banks didn't understand their full risk exposure.
Interesting.
So then my class was canceled. I'd won.
You won. And did you enjoy teaching?
I loved it, but I wouldn't have liked just spewing out mathematical formula.
Right.
I enjoyed the participation of all the students.
Right. And teaching class on risk comes at the end or during a long career in sort of metals and metals trading and the mining behind it. I mean, it's a high risk field. So you knew something about risk going into this.
I knew a lot about risk and
Right.
a lot about the fact that the banks didn't understand their risk.
Uh-huh.
So I was actually financing mines around the world, gold and copper and silver, etc.
For various companies or for yourself?
Well, I was with banks until 2004.
So you just said banks didn't understand the risk. What was it that they were missing? I mean, because when you think about investing, you think about banks, investment companies really looking very hard at the upside and the downside and the probabilities and all this. What did they miss?
Well, what I was saying was integrating the three major types of risk, which are market,
Okay.
operating, and whatever I just said. But so in mining, the financial is pretty clear. It costs something to make something, or to build something, or to find something. And then you want to produce it, which brings in the revenue. But then when you start producing it, then you end up with the operating risk. And this is where if the geology and the rocks aren't what you think they were, or your plan isn't right, you get into operational risk, which is one really that in my banking field was being missed. But within a bank, they have one department looks at credit, one department looks at market, one looks at operating, and they never get together to figure out what the net risk of all these things is.
Okay. Interesting. So what exactly were you doing for these companies? Were you identifying new mines? Were you finding financing?
Well, so there's the teaching we just talked about.
Right.
And then as a banker, I would assess the feasibility of a project development. So the geology, the political risk, the costs, the revenues from the commodities, any other legal risks. In those days, sustainability wasn't so much nonetheless, we'd have to comply with certain regulations concerning the environmental impact and
Right.
that kind of thing. So, and all of that eventually becomes numbers, right? And so you end up with something called an NPV. You know what that is, Norm?
No.
Net present value of future cash flow.
Uh-huh.
So you have the revenues less the costs, and then you figure out what that's worth today and how much bank money lending you would put against it.
Okay.
So that's what I was doing as a banker.
Okay. So when you say you identify new projects, they would come to you, some sort of like junior, mining resource company would have identified something.
Yeah, in those days, they were big companies because I was working for big banks.
Okay.
So, yeah, they would be like Fortune 400 companies or, although, having said that, the companies might be big, but the project might be small. So, that was another challenge. But at least with a big bank, you had big money to put after it.
Right. And did you specialize in any particular metals or kinds of mining?
Yeah, I mean, I really specialized, and I found this out. I'll tell this story very quickly in a second, in gold, silver, copper, and other base metals. But I was sitting at my desk one Monday morning in 1991 about 9 a.m. Fortunately, I was in the office, and the phone rang. And it was, hello, this is Al. Now, Al Flood was the president of the bank.
Uh-huh.
He said, I've got Rob McEwen in my office. Do you think we can get him $100 million by Friday? And I'm going, help me here, Al. I'll send him down and he'll give you all the data. So anyhow, I worked like mad with Rob McEwen for 4 days, and we managed to find a way to secure $100 million for him.
For what? What did he need $100 million?
He bought a mining company.
Okay.
And it was just a little mining company, but he had a hunch. It was in Canada. It became Gold Corp. That rings a bell. $26 billion market cap.
Okay.
So I lent him the $100 million that became $26 billion. But my point about this is that when Al called me, he said, since you're our gold expert, I went, I didn't know that.
Well, you were after that.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And actually, ever since, it's been a very good stepping stone. I'm sort of known as the person who created Gold Corp.
Wow. Well, that's got to be pretty handy.
It's very handy. In fact, I was just at a conference in London with all the bigwigs from the industry, and they sort of consider me like a bigwig.
Right. I love that. And a historical person, a person of great importance in the history
Of mining.
Yeah.
Well, what's important about that, I have to just add this, is that in the 80s and 90s, there were no women in mining. Not in finance. They may have been accountants or assistants or whatever. So I never saw another woman in meetings, lawyers' meetings, site visits, whatever I did. But I didn't really think about it. It was because my skills were very appropriate for that work.
And how did you develop those skills?
Right.
I mean, how does a young woman develop those skills that put you at the top of that segment?
I was very fortunate in my education, is what I consider. I was where I went to school was somewhat serendipitous in relation to my father's career, and so in teenage years I was at Chapin School in New York.
Okay.
Which taught me to sort of be myself and have confidence as a woman.
Wonderful lesson for young people.
Yes, and it still is. And then I went to British boarding school, which I hated. Every minute of the day was disciplined, homework, running, class, break, lunch. but it taught me a discipline that I found that most people, when I started my career, did not have. I could just say, today I will do this, this, and this, and this, and I did it.
Right. Why were you sent to British boarding school?
Because my father went back to London with BP. He was with BP.
Okay.
And
So he was in New York when you were at Chapin.
correct.
Got transferred back to London.
Yep.
And you went, did you have siblings?
I had a younger sister, and she and I moved these schools together.
Right.
So anyhow, and so then I went to McGill, and because
up in Canada.
Again, because my father's career moved to Canada.
Oh, okay.
And I was an oddball at Wickham Abbey because I was good at arts, which is interesting, it's come back, and math. And that's not what you do at A-levels. You either do languages or science or arts.
Right.
So they had to change the whole curriculum at Wickham Abbey for me.
This is the boarding school?
Boarding school.
Okay.
And the headmistress took sixth form, if you want to know what that is in English schools, into her study one Sunday morning and said, let's talk about college. What are you going to do? And she looked at me and she said, well, you're an oddball. You're good at English and math. And then she went, economics. This is a new field that people are starting to study. So I go to McGill and I take one economics class. And I ended up top of the economics 4 years later as a girl.
Right.
As a girl. So that's how I got into economics. And when I started doing these deals at the bank, it was just very natural to me to have a very complicated, legal documents, financial documents, numbers.
Right. But wait a minute. So you're studying economics at McGill. You graduate with a degree in economics, a BS, I'm guessing. And
it was called a BA, yeah.
Okay, BA. And then what? Did you went to get a job in some economics related field?
Yeah, I thought I would get a job since I was top of the class. And I went to they called it the placement service, where you went to get job interviews.
Right.
And there they were, looking for economists with the notation, men only apply.
Ugh. Which back in the day, it's almost redundant because it was just all set up like men only.
So
it hardly needed to be written.
This is where I laugh when I think back and how I've, not really broken barriers, but never hesitated to go forward. So I called them that morning, this one particular bank, and I said, if you happen to have an open slot today, I'd love to drop in. And they had an open slot, and they let me in. I have to tell you, the two men the other side of the desk nearly fell off their chairs. And I had just written a paper about inflation versus unemployment.
Uh-huh.
And I described it to them, and I got the job.
Amazing. And which bank was this, and what kind of job?
It's the Canadian Federal Bank, so it's called the Bank of Canada.
Uh-huh.
And I was put in the international department to do policy analysis of different countries to give to the governor, by the way.
Nice. And so you're doing policy analysis, for various countries. How did you get from there into mining?
So after 2 years, one of the governors of the bank took me to lunch and he said, there's a bigger world than this bank out there. Explore. So I explored, and I got a job with the Conference Board of Canada, of which there's also a U.S. version. Still economics, but I liked it because it was more business oriented. They had people subscribing. Companies subscribed. They were accountable. And one Tuesday morning meeting, regular weekly meeting, the president came in and went around the room and said, okay, so you're all a bunch of really smart economists, top of your school from MIT and Michigan and UCLA and McGill, but look how different you are. And he came to me and he says, you're not going to be an analyst, you're going to go to business. I went, oh, okay, here I was 23 years old or something. Anyhow, so I then went into consulting for a couple of years to figure out what that all meant. And, well, it's kind of a long story. I also went to London for 2 years, and my father was very ill by this time in Toronto. And one of my friends in London knew I was going back in a hurry to Toronto, and he said, well, you know, you've been consulting for a while. Would you like a bank job? And I went, yeah, that sounds good. He said, well, let me set up a couple of interviews for you when you're back in Toronto. And I got a job. I had an interview, and I got a job as an economist in the mining group. I went mining. How do you spell that?
In the mining group of some big bank.
Oh, yeah, it was called CIBC, the Canadian bank.
Okay.
Very big bank. With a 5 very big banks in Canada, and it was one of them. So then, long story short, I was supposed to be doing this analysis of the commodity prices, which seemed pretty boring to me. And my boss had a book on his desk, like a deal book from First Boston in London, which was a very big investment bank at the time. And after a month, I said, John, what is this book? It hasn't moved in a month. You know, he goes, we don't know anyone at First Boston in London. I said, well, I do, because one of my colleagues had gone to First Boston. And he said, well, give him a call. And 3 weeks later, I was on a plane to Australia doing my first mining deal.
Wait a minute. So what was this book that had moved in a month that nobody knew what it was?
Well, it was a description of a mine in Australia that was...
Okay.
Which had been...
So it was sort of a prospectus.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And it had just sort of accidentally found its way onto the desks of your office, and
well, you know, it would have been sent to the mining groups of all the big banks around the world. It was a very big deal. I forget how much, you know, many hundreds of millions of dollars.
So you'd looked at the book.
No, I didn't know. Have no idea what it was. I'd never seen anything like it.
Okay.
But I did know someone at First Boston
in London,
and he said, I'm not the banker, but let me put you in touch with Bruce,
right,
who was in Sydney, Australia.
And Bruce said, oh my God, it's the best deal ever, you know. And
yeah, you got to come and look.
Sold you on it.
Yes, well,
because it's Bruce's job.
Yeah. I mean, it was worth taking a look, and he didn't really sell me. I had to sell the bank to pay my way, right?
Right.
But, and then this is part of the fun of the job, is we were going to fly from Sydney up into Queensland, where the mine was, and then up further to Collinsville, which is even further north, all in one day to site visit. And it was a Learjet with 6 seats. And when you opened the, you know, normal flap, there was a steak breakfast waiting for you.
Oh, boy.
I thought, I've come to the right
Australia.
place.
Love that. And so, what kind of mine was that?
That was a gold mine.
Okay.
Yeah, and actually, in the end, we didn't do that deal because they didn't feel we had the manpower to keep flying across the Pacific. But that was the beginning. I did a lot of deals in Australia after that.
That seems like a strange reason to pass on a good deal.
Well, I thought so too. He said, you know, this executive vice president or whatever said, I know you feel it's your deal, and we've looked at our manpower and what else we're doing. And
hire people.
It actually turned out not to be a good mine.
Oh.
So their reason
Lucky.
was wrong, but their reason was correct.
And when you were in that field, did you feel that you were only as good as your last mine? I mean, if you had a couple of like you said, that was not a good mine. If you had a couple of not good mines in a row, would that sort of make you less?
I mean, firstly, it's not really up to me to finally decide, right? You know, I will recommend it or not. I actually turned a few down. But just like when Al called me about
I love that.
Gold Corp.
Al, find $100 million.
You know, I make the
for this.
recommendation to the executive committee, and they can decide to take it or not.
Right.
And also, I have to add that it takes years to develop a mine. or to finance it. Like probably that deal didn't close, that first one in Australia I'm talking about, for 6 or 8 months. By the time you've got 4 commodities and 6 banks and 2 currencies and, all the legal work that goes with it.
Right.
Very international complex. But that's when I realized I loved complexity. I just lapped it up.
Really? What was it about the complexity that you particularly liked? Was it your math mind? And
Yeah, I mean, it was really back to that headmistress, the combination of math and English. I mean, there's
right.
descriptions and analysis and then putting it into some structure that was kind of mathematical.
Right. That's just amazing. So over the years, I mean, this mine in Australia was when 1980, 1970 something. Go on, say it.
82.
Okay, 82. Well, so that's pretty
It's not
close.
70. Oh man.
Well, I didn't know.
You weren't born even.
So
in 1970.
since that mine in 82, it's been 40 some years. Has that kind of business gotten much more difficult? Have regulations gotten in the way over those years? Is it harder and harder to find resources?
Yes and yes and yes.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Many more countries are now participating in the global mining business, right? Some of which are less politically correct than others. My gut feeling from the beginning was that what I didn't like about it was tearing up the countryside for mining.
Right.
But the regulations as to how you do it, what chemicals you can use, and insistence on a reclamation plan, because mines only last as long as the resources are there.
Right.
You have to have all those things. So I'm feeling a little better about being in mining, fascinating as the business is. So there's that.
Why are you feeling better about being in mining? Because
there's more control over the environmental impact.
And more investment in reclamation activities?
Yeah, insistence on that. I mean, there always was, but it was kind of haphazard. Now, before you even start it, you have to have a reclamation plan and money in the bank to pay for it.
Oh, nice.
Nice, yes.
Well, isn't it? You kind of scoff. I mean, I don't know nothing about this.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, for people like me, it's very much more comforting to know that the land will be restored to its original natural state.
But for
the companies don't think
corporation.
it's so nice because they have to raise money and put it in a bank to plan for it.
Yeah,
having said that,
for things that are never going to profit them.
Well, sometimes, but one doesn't start a mine without thinking that it will profit you.
Right, but I'm saying that at the end of the resources in a particular mine, you still have to do all the reclamation stuff. The profit taking is done, and now you're just spending money. I imagine corporations kind of resent that.
Well, they're not allowed to say that.
Says who?
Well, one thing is many of these places are close to indigenous people.
Right.
So
First Nations.
Yes, and it's becoming more and more important to integrate.
Right. Right, and you're on the board, I think, of a mining company up in Alaska.
Good man, yes.
Right, and there, I mean, the First Nations there are like everywhere. Is there somebody in the mining company who's like the point person and sort of coordinating with these people?
Yes, there's a community relations person.
Uh-huh.
And in this particular company, there was a private company until about 4 years ago. And so they were kind of all friends with the communities. So it's actually very well managed
in that's
that
good.
regard.
And the communities are happy.
Yes.
Do they share in any of the
Well, they
profits?
get employed.
Right.
And, yeah, I mean, and sometimes, I mean, when the mine starts to produce, so there's revenue, the companies will build schools.
Right.
And other community facilities that are needed.
Right.
I mean, every situation is different, but
And for all kinds of businesses like that, it's wonderful when when the resources are there and the employment is there, but then the resources run out and so do the companies. And then unemployment is through the roof. Are there ever thoughts on, how to help these communities post, extraction profits?
there are a lot of thoughts about it.
Right.
I mean, by the time they have schools built for them, recreational facilities, hospitals, they're in pretty good shape
Right.
to carry on. And this is kind of radical, but there's something called something like next doorness, but that's not quite the term. But you're more likely to find resources in areas where there've already been mines, which means there are already communities that are familiar with mining,
Right.
and the new mine will hopefully, keep them going for whatever it is they want.
Right. So apart from being on that board, and you're on some other boards
In discussion.
in discussion. And do you still do any of the work that you were doing, say 10 or 15 years ago?
Well, yeah, exactly.
You do. That's good.
Advisory work.
Okay.
I do it not as a banker with money in the account, but advisory work, setting up structures to finance a project, for example, and then I go out and find the money from someone else because I don't have it in my coffers anymore.
Right.
But putting together financial structures, yeah.
I see. And so you're hired by the companies who have found some resources, who want the capital to really be able to get to it.
Yeah.
Sounds like a pretty good gig.
Yeah, it's tough, man.
What is the toughest part of it?
I don't really like money.
Okay.
I finally realized that. So niggling with people about getting money
Right.
is not my most fun thing.
Right.
So, but what's happened recently is that it's been a very bad market for 3 or 4 years. So people are coming up with new structures to overcome the particular weaknesses that there have been. And people are calling me, people who've done this, calling me and say, find us opportunities for our new structure. And I like that approach because then
Okay.
I'm on the buy side and not on the sell side.
Okay.
So,
Interesting.
yeah, so,
But now you're in this other world of trying to make a movie
oh yeah.
where you're on the sell side, trying to find money. How's that going, and how is that different?
It's not a lot different,
Right.
except a movie is much more a sentimental thing.
It's your own personal gold.
Well, but people
Right.
who are interested in it are also people who like the story.
Right.
So there's sort of a two-step approach.
I see. And you find that your background in finding investors has been very helpful for getting this movie done?
Yes. Well, believe it or not, the pure creative side, which you read,
Yeah.
I felt like a babe in the woods for that whole thing, but I came out okay in the end, right?
It did. It's a beautiful story, nicely told.
And I just feel I'm moving into my comfort zone, which is the financing.
Okay.
But, there are a lot of people looking for financing for scripts. So I think my advantage is that since I've been a banker, I'm considered an honorable person. I'm really going to try and make this work, all that kind of stuff. So, yes, I think it's sort of starting to come together.
Right. And,
I've got a couple of actors committed now.
oh, good.
And did I tell you that I visited my young cousin after I visited my aunt in England, who's married to someone who was called Philippa Chernin, whose brother is the producer of All of Us Strangers, The Banshees of Inniskillen, The Billboards of Ebbing, Missouri, So, right in the family, I've got a great big film producer.
Oh, nice. Love that.
Well, and his choices, I think those are all wonderful movies. So
Right.
I'm sort of buoyed. I mean, if I'd heard that a year ago, I wouldn't really have known what to do with it. But now I kind of know how to.
So you're
Integrated.
you're on a fresh learning curve and you're enjoying that.
Correct.
Clearly. I want to ask this. Somewhere in the screenplay features this precious metal or
Oh, tungsten.
tungsten. And I'm just thinking about it now with regards to all your history in metals. Was that like that had to be like on purpose? You're like, I'm going to like work some metals into there.
It was a fact that the Portuguese were selling the Germans tungsten
Okay,
for their arms.
I see.
So, Mr. Salazar, the president, was playing everything off and making money off all these different countries.
Right. And that part of the screenplay was really, really.
Historically correct.
Did you do a lot of research into that era?
Yeah. I have to confess now, I have to try and remember his name, but there's a book called Lisbon, the City of Light, something like that. Exactly of 1939 to 1945. I probably shouldn't say that because I'm going to have to quote it. And it was fabulously detailed about what was going on in Lisbon at that time.
Right.
And tungsten has another name. And I've been in arguments with people like, tungsten is not this, it's not that. It's like, no, it's all the same thing.
What's the other name?
Oh, God.
Yeah.
I can't think right now.
It's not molybdenum. What is
But
that?
that's a great word.
I love that word.
It's well, molybdenum is closer to copper.
Okay.
Tungsten is, I guess, it's
Tungsten.
something they use in arms.
Right. Yeah, you used to live opposite a ship's supply warehouse, and they had all these things made from molybdenum
I love that word.
because it wouldn't spark,
Right.
and so it was good on a ship because it would never start a fire. Or you're looking up the other name
No,
for
you
tungsten.
can keep talking.
Oh well, we have like 45 seconds left.
Okay.
Is there anything you want to add? Let me ask this: if anybody happens to be listening and they're sitting on a pile of cash, thinking, I really want to invest in a screenplay that's like the sequel to Casablanca, how would they get in touch with you?
Susan at sjmpictures.com.
Susan at sjmpictures.com. That's great. Well, hopefully, and if it works out, the radio station gets our usual 10% cut.
It's okay. We're already having dinner. That'll be good.
Oh, no, we'll take the 10%. Well, guess what? We're out of time, Susan at
Well, it's been a pleasure.
sjmpictures.com. Thank you so much for coming in and telling your story. Everybody, thanks for listening. Have a happy Friday and a fabulous weekend.
Thank you. That was fun to tell my story.
It was a blast. It went fast.
Gosh.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you.